So I want to start out by looking at a few pictures of modern day Israel. If you come to Israel today and you walk around, you'll see a really thriving, modern, comfortable city, tall buildings, big houses. You could go bike riding, paved streets, and it's really amazing. Now, it wasn't other things I just want to point out, and every single thing I'm pointing out, I have a reason for pointing out specifically these things. There's tons and tons of clothing stores. You see how colorful and how many assortments there are. Restaurants. The restaurant in this picture here is Piccolino, one of my favorite restaurants. And there's attractions, tons of things to do. It's a really, really happening, fun country. But it was not always that way. If you came to Israel about 200 years ago, we'll say starting from the 1800s, the Jews were not living all over the place like they are now. North, south, east, west, middle, you have Jews everywhere. The Jews were concentrated primarily in 4 cities. I remember discussing with a friend once, there's 4 cities that are considered the 4 holy cities, but who's giving the measure? It's not like other than God, and Yerushalayim is the holiest city. How could you really measure another city in terms of holiness? But for general knowledge, what are considered nowadays the 4 holy cities are Tzfat, Tveria, Hebron, and Yerushalayim, and the Jews were primarily living in those areas, especially Yerushalayim, because people knew Yerushalayim was the holiest city and of holiness, and that's why it took so long for Jews to even live the old city. When they were living in Jerusalem, they were all concentrated within the walls. Leave the walls. There's tons of room outside, but they felt that if they left, then they were not even in Jerusalem. So why live here? If they're going to rough it out and live in hard conditions, at least let it be in Jerusalem, so it makes it worth it. So what I want to discuss today is, this is a prep for Yom Yerushalayim. So 2 weeks of prep. What we're going to talk about today is, what was it like if we would walk around the old city in the 1800s? It's 200 years, but it didn't develop so much. What was it like? And then next week, what we're going to talk about is in the 1948 war. In 1948, right after Israel was declared a state, the Rova, which is the old city, it fell, and the Jews all had to leave, and they couldn't come back till 1967. So we're going to be talking about that. So 2 classes about Yerushalayim, we could appreciate even more. And to quote a child who grew up in Jerusalem about those days, he said, "We had nothing, but we had everything." And our goals: 1, what were the living conditions like in the old Yishuv? Now, the old Yishuv, or in Hebrew, Yishuv HaYashan, that's the term given for the Jews that were living in the old way, so to speak. And what characterized it primarily is they worked a little bit here and there, but for the most part, they would get money from rich Jews in America would donate. It was called Kaspeh Chalukah. And if you remember when we spoke about Mikveh Yisrael, was it Mikveh Yisrael? When we spoke about Mikveh Yisrael and the agricultural school that opened, it was so revolutionary because, what do you mean? We're going to work for our money? We're going to work the land? Because the Jews didn't think like that. But we are going to see later on some of the jobs that the people had, but a lot of them learned Torah. How was marriage arranged? There's a lot to say about that. Really fun. What were some of the jobs that existed back then? And where can we visit all of this in Israel? So I'm going to start with the last question first, where we can visit it all. So this amazing place that exists that you've passed many times, but probably never know. I was just admitting someone to class. Welcome, everybody. Is called, forgot something. Another question that I want to focus on is, how can we appreciate our lives and the miracle of the state of Israel even more? And how can intent bring more light into our lives? Okay. There is a museum called the Old Yishuv Court Museum, Muzeon Chatzed Yishuv HaYashan. It is in Jerusalem, and just from a quick glance at this picture, you see how there's a lot of tools that are from the olden days. You see here something wooden. We're going to talk about what that is. A sewing machine, and there's a bunch of things that people don't really use today, and it's all concentrated in one room. So this is a museum where everything I'm talking about today you can see plus more. And the zoom that I'm giving, it's primarily based on my visit to the museum, and also on the Facebook page of this museum, there was a woman there. I don't know her name. She might have even been the head of the museum, who gave a tour about all the rooms. So a lot of what I'm saying is based on that. It was really, really great tour. And where is this museum? So here is the old city, the Jewish quarter. In the Jewish quarter, smack in the middle of everything. If you recognize the street, you might recognize it by the decline or the incline. When you're going on your way to the Kotel, you're going down the street, or if you're coming back, you're going up the street. If you're not going through the Arab Shuk, this is called Or HaChaim Street, and the museum is right here. It's this little door, very easy to miss, but hopefully you won't miss it now that you know it exists. So you walk in, and what's really unique is it's this house that's 500 years old, and they preserve the house the way it would have been 100 to 200 years ago. And it's really nice. It's a window into the past, and it's just always unbelievable to hear how people lived back then. And other than, so the museum is indoors, so it's great activity if it's boiling hot outside, if it's freezing. Also, it's very, very kid friendly. You can see here from this picture, this is someone from the museum that's dressing up to tell the story. They have activities for kids. I think one of the things that they do, we're going to talk about later, about games that the kids used to make up to entertain themselves. I think they have an activity where they teach the kids some of the games. So it's really a great thing to do. And I don't know any group that's ever gone there, or even as individuals. And you don't need, obviously, if you have a guide, it enhances it. But if you see here, this white screen, they have screens in all the rooms that you click on an object, and they have videos. So it's very self-explanatory museum. So let's start. You walk into the museum, and the first thing you see is this room. Now, back then, the families all lived in a room. Their room was the house. They had one room for everything. And it looks all nice and pretty here, pretty beds, beautiful. The way, let's say we walk into the house at night. So you'll have all the mattresses on the floor. And then during the day, they would pile them all up because they want to make space to walk. And they don't have a lot of possessions. You see over here, okay, so this I'm going to say in a second about moving. But you see over here that this is their table. The bottom of it is a lid of a pot. The top is a tray they just put together. And something that the people in that society were very aware of is not being wasteful and not throwing things out and fixing and fixing and fixing and fixing, because they didn't have a lot. They were very poor, so they had to take advantage of whatever they had. And another reason why they didn't have a lot of possessions other than being poor is based on the law at the time that they were renting a house from Arabs, and they didn't let them own it, and they had to move every 11 months. So you can imagine if you're moving every 11 months, you don't want your possessions to accumulate. I'm going to talk more about this later on, but I'll just mention there was no running water and no electricity. So you can imagine what it's like to live back then. And the family all lived in one room, mom, dad, kids, maybe a grandma or an aunt. And they would have to learn really how to get along with each other if it's such close quarters. And I want to turn your attention now, so family structure I just mentioned, to this box over here. It's called a sanduk. And this box was given to a girl at about the age of 8 or 9. The boys went to school. The dad would either go learn or go to work. And the mom would be home doing the household duties, which we're going to talk about how long it took. And her daughters would stay home with her. And when her daughter was 8 years old, she would get this box. And in the box, she would start putting everything that she would need for a future home. If she would knit a pillowcase or tablecloth, she would put all these things in the box, and this box would stay with her throughout her whole life. And at about 8 or 9, that was the age when she already knew who she was going to marry. Obviously, she didn't have any say and she didn't decide. It was the dad that decided. And what would she do all day? So her mom would teach her how to be a good wife one day. And here's a closer look at the box. And her mom would teach her how to kosher the chicken. Now, don't make the mistake of thinking they would have chicken every day. They had chicken twice. One, if someone is really, really, really sick, we know that if you have a cold, you make chicken soup. It cures all ailments. I think we still even use it today. I use it. There's just something about it. So they would shach the chicken and make chicken soup if someone was really sick. Or if the chicken was about to die, you can't let a chicken go to waste. So you quickly bring it to the shachet and you have the chicken kosher. So that was one of the things that the girls would learn how to do and cook and clean and everything, and how to run a house. Now, how is marriage arranged? So you see two hands shaking each other. The dad of the bride, the dad of the groom, and it's an 8-year-old girl, and the boy could have been a little bit older. They would agree on it. The boys would get married at around 13 and the girls around age 12. And even if the marriage was arranged, however, there was one person that needed to give the final stamp of approval. And if she didn't give the stamp of approval, the marriage was not going to go through. And that was the mother of the boy, because the mother of the boy, her son is a prince, and no mother is letting their son get married to just anyone. You have to make sure that your prince is marrying the best. So how do you know who's suitable? How do you know if your son is going to be marrying a suitable girl? And now the question becomes, how can you tell if an 8-year-old girl would make a suitable wife? So what's the best way to find out? You go and you ask your neighbors. Now, this picture over here is a modern picture. I want you to pretend all the people aren't there, but first I'll address them in a minute. This is called a courtyard or a chatzed. That's what the name of the museum is based upon. And the way people used to live back then, I think there's something so fun about it, is if you see, it's surrounded by 4 walls, and every one of the walls would have a family in it. Altogether, there were 8 families, so more than one family. And the courtyard was where everything would take place, where the women, they didn't have kitchens, so they would cook and clean and hang laundry, and the kids would play. So a woman needs to find out if an 8-year-old girl is going to be a good match for her son. So she goes out to speak to the neighbors, and she goes and she asks her neighbors, how do I know if this girl is worthy of marrying my son? And something that really characterized the people living there then. So originally, the beginning of the 1800s was mostly Sephardic Jews that were living in the old city. And then the second half of the 1800s, Ashkenazi Jews started coming as well. And you walk in the street and you hear every language. You hear Ladino, and you hear Farsi, and you hear Arabic and Hebrew and Yiddish, and everything all mixed. And even the games of the children, they had every language in it. And they would all live together. So you can gather a lot from the different types of communities. So this woman, she asked the Persian woman. The Persian woman says, this is how you tell if this girl is going to make a good wife. You see how she chops parsley, you see how she chops basil. If she chops it well, you want her as a daughter-in-law. And then the Turkish woman pipes in and says, that's not how you tell. The way you tell is you go to their house on laundry day, and you look at all the laundry and you see who has the whitest, cleanest, best smelling laundry. That is the girl that you want. And the Syrian woman says, no, that's not what you do. You see how she stuffs vegetables. She's stuffing meat and rice, or she's stuffing peppers, or she's stuffing squash or onions. What's the ratio of meat and rice and vegetables? Does she make too much and then she's stuck with extra? And all these tests are so important because it's a time where you can't throw out things. You don't have anything extra to throw. So if this girl is stuffing vegetables and she's making too much, then clearly she's not someone you want for your son. And then the woman from Kurdistan chimes in and she says, no, that's not how you tell. The way you tell is you see how she peels vegetables with a knife. They didn't have vegetable peelers then, and they would peel with a knife. So how does she peel a cucumber? How does she peel a potato? Does she peel it and half of it is gone? Is it very, very thin? I remember when I was young growing up, my mother, she never used the cucumber peeler. She always peeled cucumbers with a knife. And when she did it, most of the cucumber is still there. When I would try to be like her and do it with a knife, there was a quarter of a cucumber left because I would peel it all off. So I really think that is a good test. The woman that speaks Ladino says, no, that's not the way. This is what you do. I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna go to our house. We're gonna kiss each other's hand, and then I'm gonna smell my hand, what it smells like. If I got smell from her and I smell oil and za'atar and all kinds of good smells, then she's the girl you want to marry. If I smell cinnamon and myrrh, she's using the wrong spices, she's not the one you want. Now you ask that Ashkenazi woman, and she says, this is how you tell. I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. I'm going to go knock on her mother's door. And of course, the family should be wide awake because 5 a.m., who's still sleeping in bed. And I'm going to tell the mother they need to borrow a cup of sugar. And as the mother is going to get the sugar, I'm going to be looking around the house. And I'm going to see, is the house clean? Is there dirt? What does it smell like? What does it look like? And then she says, I'm also going to see, so either another woman says this or she says it, it doesn't matter so much. I'm going to see the girl there. Oh, also I'm going to see if the girl's awake or sleeping, because if she's sleeping at 5 a.m., you don't want someone like that. She needs to be up. And I'm going to also ask her, I'm going to say, my hands, they hurt and I can't see so well and I'm knitting something. Can you help me? Could you help take out the knots, figure out what to do? And that's really all you need, because you learn so many traits about someone from the way that they sew. Are they patient? Do they know how to stick a long time to a task? Are they gentle? Do they have good fingers? So all the women give their different advice about how you know if this girl would make a good wife for your son. And this was done when they were 8 or 9 years old. And like, it's crazy to me, because if I think about 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds that I know, I don't know how many men are waking up 5 a.m. that have all these amazing cooking and cleaning skills. I know if I was given this test before I got married, I don't know how well I would have done at it. I learned my cooking after I learned cooking when I moved to Israel, really, and I was on my own. But it was just so many things. It's amazing that this was really what it was. The women were all involved in each other's lives, always looking at each other, who does this, who does that. And at the same time that they're all very involved in looking at the neighbor, they all helped each other too. And they wouldn't have survived if they didn't have each other's backs. Okay. 2020. 2, 1. Oh my gosh, I don't know what year it is. I mean, what year is it? Wow. 2021. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. Okay, so 2021. You know how like when you're writing the date, it takes you like a half a year, and then you don't put until you know the new date. Okay, 2021, January really passed. You go into your closet. I don't know whose closet this is, but very nice and organized. You say, what do I wear today? And I know at least women, oftentimes when they ask themselves, what do I wear? I'll speak for myself. I don't have anything to wear. I don't have any clothes, especially when you're growing up, you complain to your mother, you have nothing to wear. The closet is bursting with clothes, but there's nothing to wear. Back then, that was not something they could even dream of saying. They had 2 pieces of clothing. They had clothing for Shabbat and clothing for during the week. And there was no such thing of going to buy new clothes, because there were no clothing stores, right? We opened up and saw in modern Israel, there's so many stores. There were no stores back then. And what happens if you have a son and your son is very active and he climbs trees and he comes home and his clothing ripped? So there's no new clothing. You have to know how to sew and how to fix. And everyone in that society, the women specifically, needed to know how to fix things. That's what they would do. I want to point out here, you can't tell from the picture. The pictures here, I got them all from online. I haven't been to the museum really in a while. I know it didn't change so much, but so they're not perfectly clear, but there's a part of me that's happy about it, because it'll encourage you to go to the museum, the Old Court Museum in the Old City. On this is a tablecloth over here, and the woman would sew it. And what if they didn't have enough material? So they were very resourceful. And on this, if you look closely, when you go to the museum, you'll see that they would actually sometimes take sacks from flour or sugar and use it to sew into the tablecloth or the sheet, because they needed it. And on this one, you could actually see the stamp from the flour still on it. They tried to cleverly weave it away, but they really tried to use everything that they have. Here's another picture of it. And I want to talk about, this is a really interesting one, about fixing socks. Nowadays, your sock rips, has a hole in it, you throw it out. You don't really throw it out. You wear it and wear it and wear it and wear it, and you just have socks with holes in them until you decide to throw it out and get new ones. And socks are really, really cheap, but they couldn't buy new socks then because there was nowhere to buy from. So I want to tell you about how they fixed it. It was really creative. They had this, so the Sephardi woman had something that looked like a wooden egg. Pretend this doesn't have a handle. And the Ashkenazi woman had something that looked like a mushroom. And they would put it in the sock, and it would make the sock the hole wider, so then they could sew it and fix it. And in this, it's actually really creative. There's needle and thread, so it would make everything easy. And that's how they fix socks. You don't throw it out, you fix the socks. Continuing on in the museum, you'll walk into a room. Now, in the museum, you could pass very easily from room to room. Today, modern. But back then, you couldn't, because there were walls, and every family had their own room. Now, sometimes there was either 1 or 2 doors. One led to the courtyard and one led to the street. And then when they wanted air, the woman wakes up at 5 a.m, opens the doors, air flows in. But even though you could go from room to room, every room was an entire house. And you see a bed. Now, who is lucky enough to afford to have a bed? We take it for granted that we all have beds. We said earlier that everyone would sleep on a mattress on a floor and then pile them up. Who has a bed? So now this bed, if a woman was giving birth and her husband was lucky enough to be able to rent one, they would rent a bed and she would be in it from when she gave birth and 40 days later. Because women then giving birth, it was considered very dangerous, and 1/4 of the women who gave birth didn't survive. 80% of children did not make it to age 1. And they wanted to make the conditions as favorable as possible. And life was so hard back then, and we're going to talk more about other things that were hard, that the people needed hope and they needed to believe that things would be better. So other things I want to point out, one, if you look at this suitcase with the eye, so this comes from Eastern Europe. And the reason why the eye, against Ayin Hara, from the Pasuk, Ben Porat Yosef, Ben Porat Ale Ayin, people believed in a lot of kind of superstitions and wanted to ward off evil. Over here, you have a Khamsa. And also over here, you have things hanging by the bed of the woman who just gave birth, all kinds of amulets, because they want to protect the woman and her children. Also, if we look at the names that were given, the boys were given names. In the Ashkenazi world, there's a lot of names after animals, Aryeh, Dov, Tzvi. And what it comes from is these animals are very strong. And the hope is that these children will be strong and will be able to ward off whatever evil there is and be able to survive. People really wanted them to survive. So that was regarding children. It was also the more boys born, but more girls survived. And it was a very hard time to give birth. And again, I'm going to emphasize there's no water and running water, no electricity. And the woman giving birth, she'd have her neighbors really pitch in. They would come and they'd help her do laundry and watch her kids and clean the house. So that's it pays sometimes to have neighbors living so close. Another thing I want to point out over here, this pot. What is this pot for? So if there's no electricity, no one running water, there's no bathrooms. And now I want to talk a little bit about that. I always find this fascinating, what they would do when they needed the bathroom. So if it's nighttime and it's cold and dark and freezing, you don't want to go outside to the hole in the courtyard, you would go in this pot. And what do you do in the morning? Now, a huge problem in the old city, and a big reason why a lot of them why the death rate was so high and diseases and sickness, is because of the sanitary conditions. In the morning, you have whatever's full from the bathroom the night before. Don't take it and put it neatly in a hole. They take it and 1, 2, 3, and they throw it out the window. And you don't want to be someone passing under the door at that minute. And that's what they would do. Now, let's say it's not the middle of the night and you go to the bathroom. So they had a hole in the courtyard that was for all 8 families that lived there. And then I hope I'm not grossing anyone out by this topic. And then sometimes it would get really high and then they would have to get rid of it. So what they would actually do is there's someone whose job was to do this. They'd load it on a donkey, and the donkey would pass through Sha'ar Yafa and then go to an area now that's known as Chutzot HaYotzed, and the donkey would dump it off there. However, if the donkey got angry or annoyed or was beaten or something and it decided to retaliate, it would just give a good shake and then everything would go flying. Not a fun time to be living in terms of the bathroom then. So we're really grateful that we don't have to deal with that today. I want to talk a bit about cooking. So they would cook everything in the courtyard because there was no cooking in the house. And this pot over here, it's called Sir HaMa'alot. It has different compartments, almost like a modern day container. And what the woman would do is she would put her husband's lunch. One drawer would have the rice, another one would have the string beans, and then the children would go and bring it to them during the day. And the pots are used again and again and again. And if something breaks, they fix it. Here we have a basket of eggs, which was very important that you had it because the chickens would run around freely and you want to make sure you get the eggs when they come out. And of course, if a future mother-in-law is coming to the house and sees that there's eggs in a basket, she knows it means that when her husband marries into the family, he won't starve. They were very worried about what would happen. How do they do the dishes? So they would have, the way they got water, they would have this pit in the courtyard, which was not covered. So that means when they would clean the floors, the water would go in there. If a cat died, the cat might go in there. Rainwater, maybe if you're lucky. It was really, really dirty. They would buy water, a small jug, I'll show you in a picture afterwards, for the whole family. And when they did the dishes, there was someone whose job it was to sell sand. So they would buy sand and they would scrub the dishes. And they would use a little amount of water. Now, how is sand helpful? And actually, I've gone camping a bunch of times in Israel, and it's ironic that when you have something dirty, if you put dirt in it, it cleans it because it absorbs the oils. So that's what they would do. And then they put a little bit of water, maybe some soap, and and that's how the things would get clean. They had to be very conscious. I was thinking now when I was doing the dishes before the class, and I try to be very conscious to shut the water as I'm soaping up the dishes, but still the water is flowing, and it gives no appreciation to doing dishes. Or even if I go to the old city and I do Netilat Yadayim before I have my yummy shawarma sandwich, there's water flowing. That was not something they had the luxury of back then. Laundry day was a very, very big event. And I want to point your attention out to this picture. So all this is in the museum, and I don't think there's a net there anymore, but obviously it's because they didn't want people to touch. And you see a woman here doing laundry and her children over there. Laundry day is a day where you do not want to get on your mom's nerves. And the children would sit quietly on the side as she did the laundry. And over here, there would be these huge cans, boiling water. And she would do the laundry. And the kids would be quiet in the beginning. And then after about 10 minutes, one kid would look at the other one the wrong way. He'd pinch him and they'd start fighting. And then they're running around the vats of boiling water and the mother's screaming. So what does she do? She sees her neighbor in the corner cooking. She sends him to the neighbor, and the neighbor knows, signal, you want me to keep your kids busy and you'll keep my kids busy when I can. And laundry was a huge thing. And they wouldn't do it once a week. And that is how it would work. So I want to, if you see this can over here, it's a little bit bigger, maybe, well, or maybe it was even this one. If you've seen this picture, there's a guy, another job they had back then is to carry water. So they would go to Sha'ar Yafa and they would have all this for 24 hours for the whole family. So that's really amazing how they were able to deal with that. Where did they get water from? So I just said they would buy it from Sha'ar Yafa, a small amount, and they would have for 24 hours. A few more topics I want to comment on. One is also, you could see in the museum, there are different shaped challah. So the people then, like I mentioned earlier, when a woman would give birth, they needed hope, they needed things to cling on. Of course, clinging to God and the Torah is the best, but sometimes they would do other things. Over here, and I know it's a little bit hard to see, you could take my word for it, and please go visit it at the museum. This is a challah with birds on it. When would they make this? Around Rosh Hashanah, because they want the birds to carry the tefillot up to the shamayim, up to the sky. This over here is a challah with a key. They would make it around Pesach because they want parnasa, or if a woman had trouble conceiving, they would make this type of challah, so God should open up her womb. This challah over here, no, I'll go back to that one. This one over here, it has 12 circles representing the tribes of Israel, and a big circle around it representing the Torah, which unifies them. You have this one over here so there's a custom among some Hasidim, when a bride and groom gets married, before they go to the Yishuv room, that their parents would take a challah and break it over their heads, and it would symbolize that they should have a life free of complications, a very easy life, not difficult. There's one more, I don't remember what it was, but you see how they had different chalot to represent different things, and it's a fun thing to go and see. This you see here is someone who's working on a shoe. You want new shoes back then, you can't go buy shoes because there's no shoe store. You would go to the shoemaker once a year or twice a year if you were lucky, and you would put your foot on this piece of cardboard, and he'd take his pencil and he would outline it, and the child's mom would be with them, and the mom would signal like this: water, 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 water. So it leaves you to question, what's the point of tracing it if she's going to want it water? The shoes are finally ready. The child gets the shoes, he puts his foot in them, swimming on him. What do? You stuff newspapers in. Okay, now and the reason why they did that, obviously they made bigger shoes because they can't afford to buy new shoes every time the kid's foot grows. So they need to take an account for that. Now his toes it doesn't fit anymore. His foot is getting too big. What do? Cut the front. Summer, he has great sandals. The shoe is still, his foot is growing bigger. Cut the back, he has nice slippers. So the one pair of shoes, they made so many different kinds, and it leads me to think of how many pairs of shoes I have in my closet. And it's really, really, we live in a time of such abundance. It's really incredible. And I love hearing stories about this. And I love learning about how people used to live, because it really gives me such an appreciation or a different perspective or way to look at things. And the last job I want to talk about was something called mashchiz sakinim, the knife sharpener. So this device over here is something that would be used to sharpen knives. as a woman was in her house doing her daily chores with her daughter, they would hear the voices of tons of people walking in the streets. You'd have someone selling milk, and you'd have someone selling sand, and you'd have someone calling out mashchi sakinim, and all the kids would run and look. And that was to sharpen their knives or scissors. Also, they would bring sometimes. And nowadays, you need we could sharpen our knives ourselves. And even if you don't want to, you go and you could buy a knife for $1, maybe even cheaper. But that was a job that no longer exists because it's not necessary of someone. And there were two shoulder straps, and he'd carry it on his back. That was another job that they'd have back then. I want to comment on games for the kids. So I opened up with a quote from a child that grew up in Jerusalem who said, "We had nothing, but we had everything." They didn't have any games that they bought because there was nowhere to buy. And they were so creative. I'm going to tell you about different things they thought of. And it always made me think that I really, God willing, when I have kids one day, I want to just take them and stick them in a room or like outside in nature with nothing and figure out a game. On Yom Ha'atzmaut, I went with my husband's family. We had a barbecue, and he has a lot of nieces and nephews. And the amount of games they came up with was incredible. They didn't bring any toys. They didn't even bring a ball. They took a water bottle and filled it with sand. It was just unbelievable how creative kids are, if we force them to be. So the kids had no choice. They had to be creative. So what did they do? Our favorite was always jumping rope. They would do sack races. Over here, you have pits. They have this game. They called it gogoim. You take apricot pits. I actually have it in my house. It's really, really apricot pits for a while. They don't get bad, and you would throw it against the wall, and if whoever gets it closest to the wall gets a point, or you have to throw it in a bucket, all kinds of creative things. They would try to make scooters. You see over here, he's carving wood, and they did all kinds of things. It's a whole speech in itself of all the games, and the kids really, they tell, even though they had nothing, they had a very, very enjoyable childhood, and they loved their life, and they loved what they came up with to play with. So they were well taken care of in terms of entertainment. They learned how to entertain themselves. Okay, I'd like to summarize what we spoke about today. And there are so many other areas of life we don't even talk about, but that is for another time or for you. We started out by looking at the contrast and the standard of living, what Israel is today, how amazing, how modern it is, how modern our lives are, and what people had then. The way we discussed this was via the old Yishuv Court Museum, which is in the Old City, and I highly recommend you to go visit. It's fascinating to see the way that people used to live, 1800s, 1900s. And in a pile during the day, so they didn't have room to walk around. We saw the wooden box, the sanduk, which followed the girl all over the place. She'd put things in there for her husband. How we find a suitable marriage partner, all the advice that the neighbors gave, which all focused around cooking and cleaning. If this was important, what the woman had to know how to do. Clothing, they didn't have a lot. Shoes, twice a year. Socks, you need to fix. Whose bed, that they gave very special treatment to a woman who just gave birth because they wanted her to survive. They wanted her baby to survive. The death rate was very high. And we saw how many amulets there were because they want to do anything they can. If might help my child be protected, it might. And something I didn't mention, in the courtyard, they actually had all kinds of plants, some used for cooking. And there's one called the pegam, which is, for them, this plant wards off the evil eye, and cats don't like the smell of it. So they said, if animals aren't coming, clearly it works. Going to the bathroom was quite a story. Cooking, also not easy. Doing the dishes with sand, laundry day, a big day. You don't want to make mom angry that day. The chalot that they had in different shapes and sizes to represent different things. A few jobs you mentioned about selling sand, making shoes, sharpening knives, selling milk, selling water. And we concluded with some games that the children did to entertain themselves. Another question we asked was, how could we appreciate our lives and the miracle of the state of Israel even more? So in a short amount of time, we just celebrated Yom Ha'atzmaut. We see how modern and amazing this country is. And walking in the old city, the fact that you could buy clothing there, that you could go to a restaurant and do all the things, running water, do electricity, all the things that they couldn't do then. We shouldn't take a minute for granted, and every single step we do should be filled with appreciation. And the second question about bringing more intent into our lives. So I didn't talk about, but they had bakeries, and if you're interested in finding out more, you could go on the museum's website and they have all kinds of videos. One of the videos shows about a man who speaks about a bakery they used to have, and he said the secret of our challah coming out delicious was, and this is later on, this is in 1800s, this is later on, spanning 200 years, which is quite a long time. This is early 1900s. He said we would sing Zeminot of Shabbat as we bake challah, and it shows that everything they're doing with intent. And the people had very hard lives, but they put the foundation and they knew they were doing something for the future generations. They did it for us so we could have amazing lives in Israel. And I want to just share like personal stories about how I try to do it. 2 years ago on my birthday, it was a Friday, and a friend called, said, "What are you doing today? How are you spending the day?" I said, "The truth, I'm cleaning my floors." And I couldn't be happier because I'm in Israel in an apartment cleaning my floors. How lucky is that? How many Jews wish they could do that? And I really, really felt so grateful. And even today, nowadays, modern, when I hang my laundry, I can't believe I hang laundry because I'm like, who hangs laundry? Everything in a dryer. But the sun here is so strong, you almost can't not. It's an annoying thing to do, it really is. But I try to have the intent and think about what I'm doing and a higher purpose. And it really does help when you connect. And when I did the dishes just now, I thought about how I have flowing water and I'm grateful. And the more we take 10 seconds before we're doing something or while we're doing something or after we're doing something to bring intent and thought into it, just makes our life even richer. I want to thank you so much for being here. I encourage you to come to Yerushalayim, be grateful for everything, and visit the museum. Next week, we're going to be talking about when the old city fell. So I said, let's prep by talking about what life was like in the old city. And then next week, we'll talk about when it all ended. And today we have it all back again, thank God. And in honor to prep for Yom Yerushalayim, have a wonderful day.
That was great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a nice day.
Got us to appreciate the simple things in life. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Nice to see you.